Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us again this week. We're going to talk about some real estate. So this week, we are lucky to have Jesse Gordon with us. So hello, Jesse.
Hey, Russ. How are you? Thanks for having
Great.
me. I appreciate it.
No, of course, of course. Jesse and I have worked together on many transactions, in and around the New York City area. He's a great transactional attorney. The thing that I love the most about you, Jesse, honestly, I don't know if I've ever actually told you this, is that when I call you, you pick the phone up.
I do. It's true. And if I'm in the office and I'm sitting at my desk, I'm going to pick up my phone. I'm not going to put it through a receptionist. I'm not screening calls. I'm not afraid to talk to anyone.
Yeah, I got to tell you, that's something that a lot of people don't have share the same mindset, and it's very refreshing knowing that we're going to have a conversation, and if for some reason I can't get to you, you're going to get back to me really quickly. So I appreciate that. I know your clients appreciate it. So thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
So I want to get into, chatting a bit about what's going on out there. We're in a bit of a crazy place. This is nothing new. We've been talking about this even in our conversations that I've been doing with this video about what's going on in the market, how people are reacting. We've spoken to people in the city and people on Long Island, to a lender. I've given my own take kind of, but haven't yet spoken to, an attorney to sort of see from their perspective what's going on. So, what are you seeing out there?
Well, let me just start by saying, these are difficult and challenging times, as I'm sure you know, and it's had an impact on the way we live our lives. It's had a colossal impact on the real estate market in Manhattan, in the boroughs, and in the suburbs, and Eastern Long Island in different ways. My practice focuses on Manhattan and Brooklyn mostly, a little bit in the Bronx, and new transactions, new deals are not robust, to say the least. And I think the reason for that is multi-tiered. People are unsure of what's going on in the world. People aren't necessarily interested in going outside, going and looking at real estate, going into buildings where they'll have to be exposed to other people. So the new transactions in Manhattan for me have diminished significantly since this pandemic began. There have been some, but they've been few and far between. And several of them were deals that were sort of getting into place while this all was happening. As I'm sure you noted, and I'm sure as you've seen, there were some deals that were on the verge of happening when this whole thing started that simply just fell apart because people got scared, people were uncertain of what the future was going to hold, and they just backed away. So that's one aspect of things, is just the transactions taking place. And in Manhattan and in the boroughs, there's definitely been a falling off. I mean, it's hard to sell an apartment when building management companies aren't allowing brokers and individuals to even come in and see them, right?
Sure. I mean, that's definitely been a challenge. There's no doubt about that. So you spoke a little bit about sort of new transactions that are not, not necessarily happening. So how many new transactions have you gotten in post-COVID, post the start of COVID? So let's call it the second week in March until now. How many new transactions have you gotten in that have actually gone from having a deal in principle to a signed contract?
I can tell you, I can count that number on one hand.
Right.
I mean,
wow.
It's been very, very few. Very few.
Okay. And that stands. I mean, that's consistent with all the information that we're learning out there and we're seeing. Okay, so let's talk about for a second deals that had a contract out, not yet signed, pre-COVID. So now we're saying before that. That second week in March, deals that were out that have then been renegotiated and signed.
Sure. Well, I will say that, that's an interesting question, because there were a number of deals that we were working on when this all came about that simply fell apart.
Sure.
Which is understandable. There were a couple early on when this started that actually got signed at the original asking price, at the original negotiated deal terms. And those deals were deals where, the purchaser understood what was going on, maybe didn't fully grasp the totality of the circumstances, but because of, multiple variables, didn't want apartments to get away. One was a combination of a unit that was next door to a unit that a client had been trying to get their hands on for a long time. And they didn't, they were willing to, and they were aware that they were paying a premium, and they were still willing to absorb that because it worked for them in their lives. I also had a couple of deals that were renegotiated once this all started, when the purchasers realized that they had a bit more leverage because of everything that was going on. And I would say on average, those deals probably traded ultimately between 7 to 10% off where they had been when the offer was originally accepted. I had one that went a little bit higher than that, above 10%, but not much.
Got it. Okay. And were those all resales? Were any of those new developments?
Those were all resales. I have not had any new development deals since this came about. What I have had are situations with new development deals that were currently in contract, not that have been retraded, but, closings that were scheduled that had to be adjourned because buildings were unable to get their TCOs when they were expected. At another interesting scenario, I don't know how applicable this is directly to what we're talking about right now, but I had a client who had an outside date in a new development, which means that if the building was unable to close by a date certain, they would have the ability to cancel the contract, or the purchase agreement in this case, and get back their 10% deposit. Interestingly enough, when the pause was put into effect, they sent me a letter stating that because they wouldn't be able to do any work, that it was their position that during the pendency of the pause, the outside date would also be told by the length of the pause. So, I mean,
That's
look,
interesting. I've actually been curious about that.
It's an interesting scenario, and my client is already, because they previously had an outside date that was passed, was able to renegotiate a price reduction and a free storage space. So they're getting a pretty good deal at this point in time.
Sure, I'm sure.
And they may even be able to leverage it further, because I don't see how the building, even once the pause ends, how they're going to be able to get up to speed and get enough done in time for the date, even with the tolling of the date, to be reached to get the closing done.
Interesting. Okay, so back to the resales that you've seen. So these are the deals that that there was a pre-COVID deal struck with a contract out post-COVID where price was negotiated. What other sort of concessions have you seen in those types of deals?
Most of the concessions have been price related. There were some, one of the deals I had concessions with regard to, closing timing and obligations, just because we knew what we were getting into when we signed the contract ultimately, and nobody really knew when we would be back up to speed, and still nobody really knows when we'll be back up to speed. So there was special language. There's a COVID rider, essentially, that contains specific language that allows for delay on both sides in the event of COVID. And I mean, you've seen this in a lot of the deals that, and I know we'll get to this, but that have went into contract pre-COVID that are now closing. Buildings not allowing move-ins, buildings not allowing move-outs, certain banks not allowing virtual signatories, virtual notaries of documents, so that, we've had to adjourn closings in multiple cases until buildings have allowed people to actually do walkthroughs, move out, move in, etc. So
That's really interesting. We actually have a closing happening right now. That's happening virtually in a building that we do a lot of business. And they've been extremely accommodating with virtual closings and understanding. And every deal that we've had close post-COVID that was in contract pre-COVID, not that that's even relevant for this, but every deal that's set to close post-COVID, all the parties have been very willing, reasonable, in getting everything done in this virtual environment. Are you seeing a big pushback on that?
I'm not seeing a big pushback. I'm seeing everybody actually getting together and working together to get these things done, from title companies to managing agents to transfer agents to attorneys to buyers to sellers. The only real pushback I have seen has come with regard to actual physical access to buildings for purposes of getting to closing, and that would mostly be walkthroughs, move-ins, and move-outs, and that is starting to dissipate. But a few weeks ago, a month ago, people were scared, and rightfully so, and didn't want moving companies coming into buildings, didn't want people coming in to do walkthroughs, and not all managing agents, but a few, and not only the managing agents, but actually it was co-op boards and condo boards making the decision that they didn't want people in the building that didn't have to be there. And to a large extent, those restrictions haven't been fully removed, but they've been revised. So they've allowed move-ins and walkthroughs under certain circumstances, with assurances, that moving companies after move-ins are done will do sterilizations, walkthroughs being done without brokers present, or with just a buy-side broker and a purchaser present and no sell-side broker. So, as I said, I have found that people have been willing to work together, and people have been accommodating when it comes to actually, doing the closings virtually, which is not easy by any means. I mean, everybody's got to pitch in and cooperate to make these closings happen, whether it be a condo or a co-op, or a house.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. As the audience here knows, focus, we sell in a few different markets, right? And we're experiencing extremely different things in all of these markets. Right now, New York City is down, 90% ish, plus or minus. I think last week there were, plus or minus 30 closings in a week or contracts signed where usually we're closer to 300. And it's just super slow and not much is happening. And I'll tell you, on Long Island, where we do a lot of business, you still can't, like an agent still can't legally show a house on Long Island. However, the demand is extreme for what people want, and people wanting to buy homes and transactions actually getting into contracts. And
agreed, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, and in Monmouth County in New Jersey, where I live, we're really starting to do a lot more business. And I listed a home yesterday, and I had 10 confirmed showings in 8 hours. So it's just an unbelievable disparity in the market. And you see that you're seeing a bit in this moment, a bit of a flight from the urban lifestyle.
100%. I mean, that disparity, I think, is 100% explained by people wanting to flee urban areas.
Yeah. I mean, it's also interesting because, yes, that is all happening. And I think because there's this thought around people leaving the city, or the more dense areas, I think it's putting pressure on other people who would otherwise want to be upgrading, getting more space. It's putting more pressure on them to make their decision more quickly, which I think is also adding to the amount of demand that's in the suburban areas. But what's really interesting is that, I don't know if you saw, there was an article in the Times this past week about the people leaving the city and all they kind of put the hot zones in all these different areas. And essentially it said that 5% had fled the city. I mean, that also means that 95% stayed,
Yeah.
right? So it's going to be very interesting. And this isn't really about what we're talking about, but it's just going to be very interesting about the way pricing really plays into this whole thing in the city, in Manhattan specifically, when things normalize. So in closing, what is your view then on what this market looks like over the next 6, 12, 24 months?
I think, and once again, I'm not a real estate broker. I don't have my finger on the pulse of, what's going on. I can just tell you based on what I see transactionally going on, and just what my gut tells me. Also having been around and practicing, back in 2008 when, there was a different sort of collapse. I think, for the next 4 months, at least, things are going to be slow. I think things are going to remain slow in the Manhattan, Brooklyn market. I think we'll see things steadying off a bit in the suburban markets and in the, Eastern Long Island sorts of areas as well. I think within 6 to 8 months, we'll start to see the early people coming in who have, survived, who still have money, who view this as a period of opportunity to come in and get value on things that they may not have been able to have obtained previously, or maybe that they could have obtained previously, but now they see that prices have gone down and there's an opportunity for that. And I think that is going to start to create confidence, down the ladder, with other people saying, all right, well, look, we've got, sophisticated people who see value, who see opportunity coming in and starting to feel comfortable with what's going on. And I think that's going to trickle down to those who might not quite be ready to do that yet. So, within a year from now, I think the market will be back on the upswing. I mean, it's not going to be as robust as it was, 8 months ago or a year ago even, but I think we'll start to see, more and more regular transactions occur.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what goes on out there. Time will tell.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed.
Okay. Anything you wanna leave us with today?
Well, yeah, I think one of the things that I think we should talk about that I don't think we did talk about, and I think that's important, is renegotiation of contracts that were entered into pre-COVID, in this new COVID world, because that's been a lot of what I've been doing. Mm-hmm. Which is either I've been representing sellers or buyers, and we get an approval or a waiver, and then somebody says to me, oh, I don't want to pay that amount anymore. Or somebody comes to me, from the buy side and says, look, our client isn't willing to pay the agreed upon price anymore. If you want to close this, we want an X percentage reduction of the purchase price. And that is what I've been seeing the most of in my practice at this point in time is, people trying to retrade deals that were entered into prior to all this happening. After, and who are now in a position where they've got approvals and they have to close in this new COVID world. I've seen, and once again, it all depends on people's positions as to, pragmatically what they want to do. Do they want to try, does the seller want to try to make a claim for a contract deposit if the purchaser doesn't go through with the deal? Does the purchaser want to risk their 10% contract deposit? What's been happening more than anything is that deals have been getting retraded in order to facilitate getting to closing. I've had a couple of situations, as I told you, where people have simply just walked away from deals that were in place. They've just said, look, And either they've walked away and said, keep the deposit, or they've walked away and said, look, we're going to fight for our deposit, even though we don't have a leg to stand on. And we're going to, we'll negotiate something, and, we'll all move on with our lives. But what I have seen even more of is essentially sellers agreeing to reduction in prices in order to get deals closed.
And what sort of discounts are you seeing there?
I've seen discounts ranging anywhere from, 5% all the way up to 15%, which is significant. But what's interesting is in a co-op deal, right? Every co-op purchase is subject to board approval. And as much as boards don't like to say this, one of the factors they take into consideration when they're making a decision as to whether or not to approve or deny a purchaser is the sale price, right? They want to make sure that the comps are going to be good moving forward. They want to make sure that units are going to appraise out moving forward based on comps. So I've had deals, and I haven't had this happen yet, but I've got one that's going on right now where there was a significant price reduction negotiated in the co-op transfer. And now that reduced purchase price has to go back to the board for approval. And, the question is the board going to approve a deal at 15% less than it was originally negotiated? And I don't know the answer to that because I haven't heard back yet, but I have had a couple where there have been, 10% price reductions, 7-8% price reductions where the co-op boards actually have consented to the transaction at the reduced purchase price. So what I haven't seen yet is a reduction in purchase price agreed upon by the parties, sent back to the board, and the board denying. But it's only a matter of time.
Yeah.
That'll happen. That'll definitely happen.
Well, it's an interesting new world, and I greatly appreciate you taking out some time to chat with us and sort of let us know your thoughts. Again, Jesse Gordon, thank you.
My pleasure.
And if you have any questions at all for us, for Jesse, please reach out, info@focusreg.com. You can also leave any comments at focusreg on Instagram or Facebook. And thanks again, and we'll see you soon.
Russ, it was great to see you. Thanks so much once again for having me. I really appreciate it. And we'll talk again soon, I hope.
All right, man. Be well.
All right. Later. Bye-bye.